Welcome to Prime Suspects. Alongside Adam Bjorn and Prime Sports co-founder Joe Brennan Jr., I'm not your host, Matt Landis, who's turned on his out of office for this week. My name's Jesse Learmonth, your guest host for this week's episode, which is a big honor for me to get called up from the minors to the big show. And like many that closely follow the regulated U.S. sports betting industry, my head has only now just stopped spinning from what's been a historic week last week for arguably all the wrong reasons. Starting last week with New Jersey passing its expected tax increase along with an unexpected ban on proxy betting, and ending the week with President Trump signing the, quote, big beautiful bill into law on Friday, which will be the centerpiece of this week's episode. Reminds me of the old expression that there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen, and last week certainly feels like the latter. Most listeners of this show will likely be familiar with the play-by-play over the last week, but I'll tee it up here quickly, guys. Last Tuesday, July 1st, Canada Day, the Senate passed a sweeping federal bill known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which caught U.S. sports bettors by surprise with the inclusion of a provision that would limit deductions for wagering losses to 90% of annual winnings. Up until then, bettors were allowed to deduct wagering losses as long as it didn't exceed winnings for a given tax year. And now under the new rules, it's entirely possible that some will face a tax bill on their betting activity that's larger than their net winnings. Shortly after that, word started spreading like wildfire across gambling Twitter, who uttered a collective WTF in response. And President Trump, as I mentioned, signed the bill into law on Friday, while Representative Dina Titus of Nevada voiced her displeasure with those changes and signaled her intention to reverse it. Fast forward to this Monday, and Representative Titus introduced a bill that would roll back the change and allow bettors to once again deduct 100% of their losses for tax purposes. As guest host for this week, I'm going to go rogue and shuffle the ordering of the usual segments, and we'll actually open this week up with the water cooler segment. Guys, as mentioned, early reactions last week from gambling Twitter was overwhelmingly in opposition to the change. To wit, Captain Jack used the term, quote, extinction event in an early tweet after seeing news of this. The good folks over at InGame published an article titled, "The BBB is set to destroy U.S. gambling." And Rufus Peabody said his job was, quote, effectively being cut starting next year. So with the benefit of a week to digest and let the initial dust settle, I'm curious to know where each of you guys are in your analysis of this being an existential threat to regulated U.S. betting and just your overall take on what you've seen unfold. Adam, let's kick it over to you to get us started with this one.
This is far from an existential threat to the U.S. gambling space. The only people getting extincting this is potentially arbitrageurs, professional bettors, and those kind of things. First of all, having spent my entire life and born and raised and now a resident of another country between Australia and Jamaica, we don't tax gambling winnings. Not one fucking penny. Like, that's just the fact that this is registered as income, and first of all, is madness to me. Now we bring in this thing where you can only cap your losses at 90%. Like, multiple calls, multiple people speaking, Rufus, Captain Jack, yes, they're looking at it from their bread and butter perspective. But yes, I mean, there is no comeback from this. We've had multiple examples on Twitter and YouTube and different things where people are showing their accounts of, win $1 million, lose $1 million, and they got to pay, whatever the taxes are on a phantom 100,000. I mean, pure insanity at the best of it. But as for the gaming landscape, I think New Jersey hurt more than the big, beautiful bill. For us in particular, taxes going up, community betting, proxy betting, which is one of our things. But obviously we are an all-welcoming sports book that wants arbitrages. We want all these things. But I think the ultimate deafening silence sort of shows where this was pointed at. We haven't heard from DraftKings. We haven't heard from FanDuel. No ESPN Bet, no Fanatics. I mean, this clearly suits their mindset. It puts the onus on them to actually be traders and do a better job at offering competitive markets, and that gets reduced. But yeah, as for the whole gambling landscape, no, it's sort of a, mountain out of a molehill from that perspective. Obviously, our group and our circles are the loudest in this. I hope sanity prevails and the Republican Nevada representative gets in there and they sort of correct this misnomer. But it's a lot of noise, a lot of huff and puff, but it is some serious implications for many, many people. And it just makes no sense.
Joe, let's have you pick up on Adam's comments there. What is your overall distillation of the last week and how it's all unfolded?
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people wetting their pants about it. And they have every right to. because it really forces a change on them about the way they want to run their business. A lot of people saying like, oh, they're targeting professional gamblers. No, they're not. I mean, this Senate Finance Committee did not start off with trying to either help out the recreational sports books by driving pros into other venues. They weren't, as some people suggested, trying to create a competitive advantage for Kalshi. That wasn't it. It was very simple, Capitol Hill budgetary squeezing. The money in the government is like squeezing a balloon. You squeeze it at one end, it gets fat at the other. They needed to find $1 billion in offsets for things, and they found it by somebody said like, well, what if we, we're talking about the one that particularly affects us, the tax deduction that affects us. There's other ones in other industries, other walks of life that happen to help the Republicans offset the numbers that they had to get to in order to pass the big, beautiful bill. What this probably means is, initially, folks are going to have to find other places to go. The sad thing is for government, that they're going to lose those people. They're going to lose the potential for the revenue. The federal government is going to lose probably far more in federal excise tax being generated, since it's a handle tax, than they're going to generate in income tax being returned to them by people not being able to deduct 100% of their gambling losses. I'll take that. I will make that bet right now with anybody who's willing to take the other side of that. Okay. So the federal government probably will, in the long run, lose money on this rather than gain money. Pros weren't targeted. Poker players weren't targeted. It wasn't like that. The other thing is candidly, this is just, if guys want to stay in it and they want to continue to be able to participate in the regulated market and they're going to be a pro and everything like that, they're going to have to hire a better accountant, and they're going to have to find more ways in order to be able to structure themselves than just a very simple structure of like, I win this at gambling, I lost this at gambling, these are my expenses. And they're just going to have to find creative ways to offset that thing. I'm not suggesting that anybody cheat on their taxes, but there isn't Donald Trump doesn't pay income tax, didn't pay income tax for something like 10 years based on the losses that he had on his casinos in Atlantic City. So I am fairly certain, without having dived into it too much, that professional sports bettors, if they really want to find a way to stay in it and participate in this marketplace, will be able to find a way, accounting-wise, in order to be able to make up for that loss of the deduction. But in the meantime, this is yet another symptom of government taking an incredibly laissez-faire attitude when it comes to their tinkering with taxation and the economics of betting and gambling. And so far, I have not seen anything that's passed in this last year, whether it's what New Jersey has done, whether it's what the federal government's done, what Illinois has done, that's going to do anything other than create downward pressure on the marketplace and probably reduce revenues coming into government coffers.
And talking about the accounting piece there, some of the discourse over the last week that I've observed is, a segment of the betting population on Twitter, albeit probably a small segment in the overall population of US sports bettors, talking a bit about, creative accounting that might allow one to soften the blow from the new tax structure. Not going so far as to suggest not declaring this and filing taxes, ignoring that. There's a lot of conversation around this concept of some vague language around this notion of a gambling session and a bit of creativity around what constitutes a gambling session. Have you seen anything over the last week on Twitter or otherwise that suggests to you, Adam, that potentially there are some clever ways one could structure their activities such that it is a bit of a softer blow at the end of the year when taxes are filed? Is there anything that's come across your desk or your radar that might be something that the bettors can look at as a solution to this?
No, not really. I mean, the one thing they can look at is give up their US citizenship, move to a real country that doesn't tax the gaming. You can just move north of the border. I mean, go up to Canada. I'm sure that's, the other thing is no one knows what a session is. I mean, there doesn't seem to be any kind of idea. Is it that you get home on a Friday night, you load up the casino and you start playing, and then you fall asleep at the half tanked and whatnot, and that's the end of your session. And then you wake up in the morning and you start playing again, and by lunch, there's no rhyme or reason. I don't know if there's anyone that could even in the government taxation, IRS, wherever that is, be able to explain what a session is. I've seen 100 variations of what it could be, but no one has actually said this is what it is. And I think that's as much confusing as anything. But to go back to a couple of things Joel said, one, they're trying to get rid of the excise tax. So that's one thing. The goal of regulating was to kind of beat the unregulated. They've done everything possible, especially over the last 6 or 12 months, to pump up the unregulated market and make it more existent for many, many players. It's easier to move money now than it ever has been ever before. The competitiveness of the landscape, the excise tax was meant to be removed because the unregulated market doesn't have to fight with that. Now you're having, this 90% cap and then this session thing that complicates it. We all know around the world, don't mess with the IRS. And they're just making it so damn difficult where a lot of these people are just saying, well, fuck it. What else can I do? And yes, it wasn't meant to help a Kalshi per se, but it certainly has. I mean, I was looking at the weekend. They had some events that had $20+ million on it. And I can sure as hell know that sportsbooks weren't writing that kind of volume on some of these events. So there is a transition there. On X this week, I even, there was comments about Rufus saying, all the various things, people giving suggestions. And someone said, well, why don't you go work for the other side? And he said, well, they don't pay enough. So I asked him, what is enough? So, there's opportunities there. This is why I am now more on the other side of the fence than I, have been, because that's the future. That's the sort of path forward. It's very hard to find good bettors that can become good bookmakers. There's sure a hell of a lot of good bookmakers that are shit bettors and, lose their salary each year. But there's a way to play this. But get back to the session thing, no idea. Nobody's got any idea. So if anyone out there actually knows what they're expecting, let us know, because I guess we have 6 months to kind of prepare and get ready for whatever it may be.
So on that, I would suggest that everybody slow down, take a deep breath, and don't ever take tax advice from betting Twitter. Okay? It's nice that people are trying to be helpful and that they're suggesting ways around this or anything like that. Just the fact that, like, the session thing has gotten, one person mentioned it and it turned into a damn virus. So, and now it's so thoroughly misunderstood that all it is now it's just creating confusion, white noise for everybody. So for the people who are legitimate pros, the people who are legitimate arbiters, the people who are legitimate, just high volume players, high volume whales, right? Unfortunately, this is one of those times where sometimes evolution is forced upon you, okay? I'm not a professional bettor, okay? On some level, can't necessarily relate to what people are going through. But I am a taxpayer. I've started and run a number of couple of businesses. So when it comes to deducting losses, expenses, things like that versus revenue and all, and having to reconcile those taxes on a quarterly basis and the year-end basis, I understand that all too well, okay? And sometimes you just need to stop. And instead of letting the world end for you prematurely, get good counsel on this, okay? And that was not a plug brought to you by the American Association of Certified Public Accountants, but it sure sounded like one. In the meantime, Adam's absolutely right. And this is something that I've tried to be kind about it. I'm trying to be diplomatic about it because I guess I have to be. But I don't know how American lawmakers can keep going back to the well on this so unthoughtfully and creating conditions that are simply just it's going to drive an enormous amount of volume into unregulated marketplaces. Let's set aside the implications that has for taxes, but let's talk about from a consumer protection, a market integrity. Like, you cannot, over the duration, have a shrinking regulated market next to an increasing unregulated market and not increase the opportunity for integrity problems in the games. It just is not going to happen. And yet lawmakers, time and again, seem intent on doing this. They don't put it in the bill, how do we make our market smaller? But that's what they do. They're not doing the homework to show what's the ripple effect if we do this. And certainly all the mutes that are over on the recreational sports books right now. They're all like, no, this is great. This is great. Oh, yeah, we don't have to worry about keeping out Rufus and Spanky and all the other nasty little pros, sports betting card counters, and all the other dumb references they have. It is not in their interest to see those alternative venues grow. $1, but they seem intent on doing it. Make some of those brands that are sitting outside of the regulated market and who still dominate. We're not going to name any names here right now, but there are brands right now that when we look at like search engine rankings and things like that, like there are brands, there's at least 2 brands right now that treat DraftKings and FanDuel's like their little bitch when it comes to search results, search traffic, all that. And they've been doing it for a long time, and they'll keep doing it because if players have to look for alternatives, that's where they're going to go. So FanDuel, DraftKings, keep doing it because when it comes around like the annual Super Bowl whining ass letter to DOJ and the FBI and to Congress and all sorts of law enforcement, when the AGA is like, we've got to put a stop to the offshore sportsbook industry. Everybody rewind back to this moment when the AGA applauded this bill, applauded a bill that just gave more oxygen into the lungs of the offshore sports books and guys on the street and every other alternative means. Yeah, New Jersey, they passed their law like outlawing sweeps casinos. Okay, good. I bet it won't slow the sweeps guys down one bit. The only way that they can make this, the only way they can take the size and the oxygen and everything else away from the unregulated guys is being able to offer a better product, and we're not there. We're going in reverse.
Yeah, let me just bring up one topic here because they banned sweepstakes, made it illegal or whatnot, yet DGE licensed a whole lot of vendors that provide services to these sweepstakes. So what do they do in their own backyard to review some of these processes?
Oh my God, you're such a troublemaker.
They come out and bring down the hammer on let's make this illegal, but they do realize that there is at least, 20 to 30 licensed vendors within the DGE list of call.
But we're not naming any names, right? I didn't name any names. How much do we want to punch our regulators in the nose? Look, the regulators didn't pass this law. So let's be honest about that. The lawmakers did. The regulators down in Atlantic City, they're the ones who are now, it's like, okay, let's think about what DGE was turned into in New Jersey just alone. Now they got to police exactly what Adam was talking about. Plus now, and I don't mean this to be dismissive or insulting or anything like that, but it's a pretty apt analogy here. They've been turned into the mall cops for FanDuel, DraftKings, and the rest of the rec guys who don't want any proxy betting or anything like that going on in New Jersey. Why has DGE got to waste a single moment of their enforcement resources? They're part of the Attorney General's office of New Jersey. Why are they out trying to keep Spanky and those guys off of FanDuel and DraftKings? Well, because FanDuel and DraftKings can't do it, so they're throwing up their arms and saying like, oh, help us out. Why does New Jersey do any of this? So, but the regulators, they're going to get screwed just as bad in this thing as we're going to get. But it's the lawmakers. It's entirely on Trenton. It's entirely on those people who pass this bill. Just like in Congress, it's entirely on those senators and their goddamn staffs who are just like, hey, what's a stupid idea that we can come up with to get an extra $1 billion? Like, well, let's trim a little bit here. Like, there's no thoughtfulness to this. And why is it so frustrating? Because you can't create a golden goose and expect it to lay golden eggs to public all your public spending and then choke the fucking shit out of it. And that's what they're doing. But I'm not going to get upset.
I'm glad I dropped those little tidbits in there to get Joe going again.
Well, that seems like the perfect opportunity to transition to our second segment, which is normally the first, which is Inside Prime Sports. So with all the discussion over the last 20 minutes around the events of the last week and what's went down, Adam, over to you. What has the conversation been internally within Prime Sports and BetCris, particularly given that both brands position heavily towards sharps, advantage players, and high rollers, which, as we talked about, the bettors who will potentially be impacted the most by this bill. Is the internal dialogue right now at this prospect of some of these players reducing their activity and or moving to unregulated alternatives? Is it a code red emergency internally? Is this just a temporary storm to weather? What's been the internal dialogue as all of this is shaken out over the last week?
There's been none. I mean, for us, again, we're an all-welcoming sports book. If we have less sharps in the door, well, good and dandy. It's not like we're begging for their action. It's just that they're welcoming their action in. But if some of them decide that, one, I don't want to lose the arbors, which I think are the biggest sort of key component to this, because as I've said many a times, there's not another entity in New Jersey that I don't want to be on the other side of the arbors doing the gambling gods good work. For originators and all these other things, I mean, you'll get a taste of what they do, whether it's a smaller amount and things like that. Ultimately, it's sort of those, hopefully the bridge jumpers and some of those ones that they do put in big volume. They do, they're positioned in a dangerous spot with the way that they play. So it's a blip on our radar. The idea is just keep forging ahead. I think the first NFL game is in 58 days. That's all we're concentrating on right now, is just getting the engines running and things like that. And this doesn't kick in until 2026 anyway. So we've still got 6 months to sort of, have these big, bad, angry professional bettors for the last 6 months of their career wanting to come in and take our heads off and things like that. So there's really been no internal sort of operational aspect to it. It's more of sort of the side conversations, other bettors, things like that of that nature. And then, as I'm always trying to do, recruit some of these good bettors to come to the dark side and work out if they have a tool or a skill set that can transition and ultimately be ahead of the game on that sort of side of things.
And to kind of chip in on this, look, I've heard a couple of people say, like, the New Jersey thing, the proxy thing. I had one reporter suggest, like, oh, well, they're gonna look for DGE to make an example of one particular professional bettor that we could probably all figure out who they're talking about. And I'm like, yeah, well, that guy has his own personal account with us. He plays with us. So Spanky, Captain Jack, Rufus, these guys, they all can bet with us directly. They don't have to come in with their beards or their 6 closest female living relatives or whatever. They can bet directly with us. We don't have a problem with it, okay? But, as I also said to them, it's like, well, look, they can bet with us, but if this law basically fouls the entire New Jersey marketplace, that is kind of tough, because I think Prime's a pretty good opportunity for a professional bettor or anybody. But if they suddenly say, like, yeah, we're not going to hang around New Jersey just for Prime, it does create a kind of toxic environment for guys. So I'm not trying to make light of what's going on, but at the same time, I've had this discussion with a few people. Nevada had outlawed messenger betting like 3 decades ago. And Billy Walters wrote the manual on how to get around all of that 3 decades ago, and had operated successfully there for quite a long time. So there are ways of them dealing with this. It's to what level are people committed to evolving to be able to address these changes in the system.
And Joe, you mentioned this a few minutes ago, but the more recreational sports books have been noticeably absent in their commentary or response to the Big Beautiful Bill. Unlike Circa, Derek Stevens was quite vocal on Twitter about his opposition to it, and rightfully so, because it is easy to see how operators like a Prime Sports, like a BetChris, like a Circa Sports operate on much lower margins and catering to a certain segment that are probably more disproportionately affected by this. Easy to see why they might resist. Yet, as you said, the retail operators have been, basically silent on this. Why is that? And do you actually see this being a net positive for their business?
I mean, they're not good bookmakers. They're good marketers, right? They're really good at handing out free money, but they're not good bookmakers. It's why SGPs are the most hyped product, most marketed product in our industry. And they've gotten the public to bite on that. And as long as the public stays hooked on SGPs, on jackpot sports bets, those guys have life, right? They don't have to be good bookmakers. They can just be good marketers. So this notion that, look, they were being challenged by regulators in Massachusetts on this, and they were showing their contempt for the regulators. They don't want guys who look anything like a winner, whether they are a winner or not, anybody who even slightly hints at being a potential winner, they want off their balance sheet. They're not going to take the chance. So, yeah, I'm sure they're tap dancing around their, well-appointed offices right now, thrilled to death about this, and are probably looking to see how do they roll this out in other states.
All right. Well, that brings us to our look ahead segment. And as alluded to just the other day, Representative Titus of Nevada introduced the bill called the Fair Bet Act, which basically seeks to reverse the change made in the Big Beautiful Bill and basically restore the eligible deductions back to 100%. Adam, as we look ahead here, a lot of the analysis over the last weeks pointed to the fact that the loss of sharp players from the ecosystem would ultimately make the recreational products worse for consumers. And assuming that the Fair Bet Act doesn't pass and that the current changes do remain intact, how do you see the ecosystem dynamics shifting as it relates to product, pricing, and consumer choice?
Well, it should actually go the other way. I mean, you take out the best of the best bettors and you only have the recreationals, you should offer even money both sides. You don't need to make it any fatter or juicier because there's so many people that you could give them the final score and they still manage to back the wrong side. It just wouldn't matter. I mean, that's the one thing that I don't believe that it'll do. It won't make the product worse. What makes the product worse is the raising taxes, the cost of business going up, all these little things, the excise tax, all these things that are sort of better related in that aspect. It's all business expenses. If your cigarette prices went up because the taxes went up, they started gouging them. So they had to put up those prices. Anything where there's added taxes or added cost of business, or it just makes it harder on your bottom line, you have to widen or raise the price. That's what's doing that. Losing sharp bettors, people moving out of the space, and that void will be filled. There'll be other people that do work out how to get past the tax structure and whatnot, the cost of what the businesses and that are doing. So that's not part of what will sort of hurt the ecosystem. It's more of the taxes and what the legislators are doing. Again, Joe's the one that over the last 6-12 months has sort of got me pointing the guns at the legislators, not the regulators. So I can have nice, peaceful, calm talks with the regulators more now these days, knowing that they're given the parameters and given the set of rules, and then they're trying to build that into it. Even meeting with the Arizona group recently, they kept saying, it's in our statute, it's in our this, it's in our that. So again, for us, it's knowing the rules of the game, what are the boundaries, and playing within that. Bettors coming out of this market shouldn't hurt the product. The product is only going to get hurt by the taxations and all those kind of things.
Joe, coming back over to you, the Fair Bet Act, which again was tabled this Monday by Representative Titus, has garnered bipartisan support. As you look into your crystal ball there, how do you see that bill playing out, and how do you handicap the likelihood of it garnering enough support to pass?
When you had 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans sign on to co-sponsor the bill, that's a good start, but we're not really at bipartisan support yet. They got to get past just 4 sponsors. I think it's going to be kind of tough this year to unring some bells, but they do have time. The most important thing was Congresswoman Titus is a Democrat, and the fact that she was able to immediately get some Republicans to sign on the bill is encouraging, because if it was just Congresswoman Titus, Democrats aren't moving anything here until they have a chance to maybe win the House back or reach the Senate. I mean, the Democrats could right now propose a joint bill that cured male pattern baldness, cured erectile dysfunction, and gave everybody a winning lottery ticket, and it wouldn't pass unless it became a GOP priority. So it's good to see that. Here's the concern that I have. Even if Congresswoman Titus's bill is successful, man, this thing has already started as a virus, because all you have to do is look at today, the news that in the New York State legislature, a Democratic state representative introduced a bill to eliminate all deductions for gambling losses on state taxes. And, I don't recall the legislator's name, probably because the top of my head blew off when I read it, but I do remember their quote, which is that, New York should not be subsidizing people's gambling. And here's the thing, they're not. When people lose money to the state's operators, that's then taxed. That money isn't water vapor that's pulled out of the air. It's pulled out of New York State citizens. So it's already taxed. By not allowing New York State citizens to deduct those losses, they're trying to double dip in a way, okay? And what it really comes down to, and it's on some level, it colors this entire tax debate this year with the increasing the taxes. And it is, government is becoming increasingly reliant on gambling taxes to make up for the taxes that they're unwilling to levy directly on their citizens and on their companies. But even though New Jersey, New York, they legalized sports betting for their citizens, to say something like, oh, we're not going to subsidize gamblers, that New York State legislator is saying that even though we've legalized it and we take 51% of the gross, the fact that you're still doing it, that means there's something morally wrong with you. There's still this moral condescension to our business, that we're a dirty business, right? Never mind the amount of tax revenue in New Jersey, in Pennsylvania, in Illinois, and in New York that this industry is generating based on the laws that those legislatures enacted and those governors signed. This was all permitted. Somehow, our customers and our operations are still the bad guys, and we deserved to be taxed in a punitive way. That's what's really being said here right now. So that's the difficulty that any legislation, whether it's Congresswoman Titus's legislation or anything else, is how do you overcome still this attitude that's deeply rooted even in an institution that is so overwhelmingly benefiting from it. State governments benefiting from this tax. And you can forget about getting rid of the federal excise tax, okay, right now, because they just reduced the deduction to try and raise $1 billion for the federal budget. That federal excise tax is not going to go anywhere because it's scored into the big, beautiful bill. So that money is spent already. So there's not going to be any relief on that front. So the federal government and state governments are highly reliant on the gambling industry, the companies, the operators in it, and our customers. But somehow we're all still scumbags, and we should all be punished, and we should be taxed above ridiculous levels, acceptable levels, because we deserve to be taxed. That's what they're saying.
All right. Well, the story will continue to unfold, but for now we'll call time on the Big Beautiful Bill episode. Thanks to you guys for letting me sit in as guest host, and we'll see you next week with your Big Beautiful host, Matt Landis, right here on Prime Suspects.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Prime Suspects. Register for Prime Sports at primesports.com and download the Prime Sports app. You can follow us on Twitter at @PrimeSuspects_, at Joe Brennan Jr., and at Adam Bjorn 2. You must be 21 or over to play on Prime Sports. Always bet responsibly and within your limits. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER.